Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and go in more into depth with the into provenance. And so these slideshows are a really great way to keep me on track. Um, they're a little bit more fun to make and just makes it a little bit smoother instead of me trying to go to my website and pull things up and click on things. I can just put a link to my website so you can find where everything is on there. So again, this is the photo that right there, that is an older photo that was copied in the 1860s, but has all the evidence of it being originally like a daguerreotype or ambrotype. So we'll just go ahead and go to the next page. So I already talked about this a few months ago. I guess it's April now. I probably did this back in January. But I'm going to go more into depth about provenance history, things that I just slightly touched on, I think, on the other slideshow. And so it was 3 years ago that I paid Colin Weaver to do the authentication process because I talked to, you know, the guy that owned Julie Murdoch Smith's family album. I talked to him. So I have the emails of him referring me to someone. I lived in Orange County at the time in Beverly Hills to authenticate it. And I said, well, they're writing a scientific paper on my photo. How do I know I need to get authenticated. I need them to analyze the paper and make sure it doesn't look fake or anything. And we just have to have they didn't ask me. Again, I mean, it's all on my own volition to get authenticated. I owned it. I knew I needed to have it done. And I'd owned it a little over 2 years at that point. And so it was only 2 years of researching. I having known nothing. Whereas, there's a lot of historians that are started like, that maybe have studied this for 30, but I've learned a lot in the last now 5 years that I've been studying everything. Anyway, he did find 1860s photo. I knew that really soon after owning it. Again, it was the moment I got in a mail, I was like, oh, I'd been researching that whole week before I got it. The moment I was holding it, I was looking to see if it was an albumin print. And I just didn't, to see, oh yeah, I was going to see if it was the type of paper, like I really knew nothing. And I'm being so raw and boring and honest here, but I knew that I was trying to see if it was a saltwater print. So I knew the albumin, like I was just looking at just the actual photo. And if it was glossy and it was albumin, that was later. So the actual photo was taken later. So for years, I thought it was always a paper photograph. I'm like, well, I didn't care. I wasn't concerned with whether Lucian Foster took my photo. Um, I knew that someone else could have taken it. I'm like, well, he got his photo taken more than once. Then I believed that since 2016 before I even, cared that much about this photo. I never thought I would own it, and I'd been analyzing it like a full year because it was September 2016, October 2017. When I bought it, I was more convinced of the Spiritus photo, which a lot of people are too, because he just looked young and he's got huge hair. It's all about the hair, like the hair. Like they just skip over the nose that's small. Someone, I won't say who, said he looked shorter, and I can't get that out of my head. Then I just really stopped caring about the Spiritus photo. And I knew the nose wasn't quite right, but anyway, it's just the truth. So, so I knew it was the actual physical product was printed later. But again, the spirit was telling me that I just kept feeling impressed to look up. I found Emma Smith's 1860s, also 1860s carte de visite. But it was the image itself was taken in 1845 because the little boy, Julia Murdoch Smith, was his older sister. She mostly took care of David Harm, so she would know what is a photo of David, whose father was killed 3 months before he died? So you just go to my website, you'll see that photo of Emma. The carte de visite has the pencil written, and the daguerreotype is owned by the Community of Christ, and they sent a report. I've seen the report. It actually was passed down through David Hiram's line, the daguerreotype. And it's got scratches on it. It's really damaged. It's almost completely black. So the original 1845 daguerreotype, look at our paper. Go to the Anthropological Review, see the daguerreotype of Emma Smith. You can find that paper there. Totally damaged, but her 1860s carte de visite copy of it, very, very clear, that ended up in Julia Murdoch Smith family album, and that was all, of course, kept together. But you can get many copies of a photo. So there could be another copy of my carte de visite out there, because that was a nice, cool thing in the 1860s to have many copies. And that's why paper photography was so cool and cheap. And then is not in here, did he? Well, he does say right there that he thought it was copied from a daguerreotype. So again, like I said, I always thought it was a paper photograph. You can just watch my oldest videos to see. I didn't even, you probably won't even hear me talking about Lucian Foster or that letter, or I don't know when I read the letter, the 1910 letter to the Salt Lake Tribune by Joseph Smith III, oldest son of Joseph Smith, who first mentions a daguerreotype. Of course, you've got Joseph F. Smith mentioning one in the 1850s. This is 1910, but that was in the Journal of Joseph F. Smith. Huge jump in dates, but he said he also had a daguerrean likeness of his Brigham Young, his uncle Joseph Smith, and his father, and who was killed. So, but it burned in a fire. Anyway, he does say, this is third paragraph down. Go to my website to blow it up if you want to see his report. But nothing looked fake. That was a big thing. So I spent several hundred, and he's like, basically, if I see something that indicates it could be fake, then you want to spend more and we'll use a huger machine. But he used all the machinery he had and all the techniques. He took a little piece of it off and looked under a microscope, measured it. So you can read all these. I won't go into great detail, but that it was an 1860s date albumen print. So I knew that when the moment I opened it and looked, I'm like, this is albumen. It's shiny. The evidence it is copy includes the high contrast loss of detail, and the fact that it's an oval. Daguerreotypes, especially in the 1840s, are often this oval shape. So Emma's daguerreotype oval. Wilford Woodruff wrote about Lucian Foster taking his daguerreotype oval. Phoebe's daguerreotype is an oval shape, and my picture's cut out as an oval. But the lighting, quality, style, everything is nothing like J.S. Bibbins. And so, but yeah, so my concern was, well, how could it, so it's from a daguerreotype. It wasn't always a paper photograph. He's like, oh yeah, and gave all these reasons why. And I was disappointed. You think I'd be happy because, oh, well, Joseph Smith III talked about a daguerreotype. This is good. And it, had 7-hour drive home from San Francisco, 7 hours there, 7 hours back, all in the same day, and a few hours with Gawain Weaver. I'm not sure how he likes to say his name. I apologize. No, after saying it many times, probably. He said it could be a daguerreotype of a daguerreotype, that they did that, and it would end up in the correct perspective. Because again, my concern was a daguerreotype would be in the wrong perspective. And so then why would it match the death mask in the correct perspective if it was a daguerreotype? Because they're flipped. And he also started talking about a daguerreotype reversing prism. I was like asking him, what is this? So he's like, just Google it, just write it down, Google it. So I'm like, okay. So I'm just taking notes. So I got this report sent to me days later, but as we're sitting there talking, I'm writing things down and re-email. And he was really great. He was excited and great to talk to, and just his insights were amazing. So, if you do a daguerreotype of a daguerreotype, it flips it around again so that it's in the correct perspective, right? And a reversing prism is something they put on 1800s daguerreotype cameras, like a little mirror that would flip the image around so it'd be in the correct perspective because they wanted to take a photo daguerreotype of like the White House, but have it be in the correct perspective if there was writing on it. They knew pretty quickly they needed to get around that issue with daguerreotypes. So this is the back of my photo. I didn't realize it would look pixelated only now. I should have zoomed out, but it says J.S.Bibbins, comma, and then photographic artist. And so I was like, oh, well, that shouldn't that be an indication that this is not the original? And as Godwin Weaver says, it really sounds like, and we both looked at um, J.S. Bibbins' photography, which is out there and still being sold, um, compared to Lucian Foster's work. And my image looked more like Lucian Foster's than J.S. Bibbins, who printed my picture, right? But it has Newark, Illinois. So J.S., as I did research of J.S. Bibbins in Ancestry, I found Joseph Slocum Bibbins. And in Google, I spent hours and hours. I mean, October 2017 on into now we're 2023. So we're coming close to 6 years of me researching this. But he was born in Wilkes-Barre, Luzerne County, Pennsylvania in 1821. The photographic artist was born to Elisha and Alice Bibbins. His father was a Methodist circuit rider who knew Emma Smith. I'm just saying it as a fact because I've researched this heavily, and he did. And so we'll talk more on that in a minute. But he moved with his parents and siblings to Kendall County around 1838, and he died in 1891 in Plano, Kendall County, Illinois. But he was buried in the Millington Newark Cemetery. In Plano, Kendall County, Illinois, is where Joseph Smith III, Alexander Hale Smith, and David Hiram Smith all did live in Plano, Kendall County, Illinois, when in the 1860s, when my picture was printed that ended up in a Smith ID family album, which I had seen written. Anyway, so the headstone for Joseph Slocum Bibbins, you'll see that he died in Plano. I was buried in Millington. Like I said, I bought my image. It was October 2017 after reading the 2009 Jared T. post for the juvenile instructor. I probably didn't actually, I'd had the picture since fall 2016. Didn't read this blog post until I'd say like June 2017. But that blog post helped me find the owner and helped me see that there looks like there could be provenance, right? And it stated the CDV. They say daguerreotype in the blog post. They're wrong. Like in the heading, like what Jared says, but then in the body of him quoting eBay seller, he calls it a CDV even back then. Like he did know his stuff. He really was a real collector. Stated it came from a Smith family album, or he just said a Smith ID'd photos in it. And so people were telling him it looks like it could be a Smith family, it could be Mormons, and all these things. Only two were left in 2017, which included an image of a gal that I think it said Missouri in the back. It was titled as Mrs. Smith, and he's just like, she's related to him. Go ahead. You want to buy this too? He's just really trying to, I was really interested in that picture, but I didn't get it because then he went from 100 to 300. Most images, and I was barely making minimum wage because I just had to have a job, so I just got a job at an ice cream shop. And so most images were sold before 2009, before Jared T wrote his blog post. And so I don't know what was left at that point in 2009 because I didn't see a store. I didn't know about any of this back then. And then you'll see on the blog all this fighting erupts, lawsuits, mocking is immortalized there. Whether they took the whole website down, and then it came back soon after. So it is back, but I went ahead and just linked on my website to the Wayback Machine, and then you can just see what it really looked like in 2009. So if they want to remember how much fun they had, but as they're fighting, they're also, and it just really just upset me, but they were looking at the eBay page and talking about it. And so that helped me find the guy. I'll just say that. So Joseph Smith's journal states on May 18th, 1844, George A. Smith and Wilford Woodruff went to Newark, Kendall County, Illinois, where they held a presidential campaign for Joseph Smith's bid for the presidency of the United States. And they had appointed a political meeting in Newark. This is a quote, this evening. And there was going to be one in Juliet, where they expect to present to the citizens General Smith's views of the powers, policies of the government, and discussing the subjects of politics. Wilford Woodruff, George A. Smith. And so as Joseph Smith III goes to visit the members of his church, which are pretty much all in Kendall County, but he's living in Nauvoo. Is that Hancock County? Yeah, but he's off of the Mississippi. It's like several day journey away from where he's living, and then he's now ordained as their leader. So, but he mentioned on his first trip that George A. Smith, one area that he was at outside of Millington is where J.S. Bibbins, where this is. So this headstone is in Millington, Kendall County. So Joseph Smith III was really close to here in October 1860. I think I went into that in the last video, but he, here you see, and some headstones were like this. It wouldn't just be his information written. They left room for the rest of the family because they maybe didn't have enough money for more than one headstone. And so Elizabeth Lott was his wife. Florence was his daughter. And then the grandmother, they just put grandmother. So one of the kids probably, well, obviously one of the kids made that. But yeah, if you just go to find a grave, J.S. Bibbins, you're at Kendall County, Illinois, 1821, you'll see this, and people take photos, and it literally will ping. It needs to be done with a smartphone. They know that this grave, this headstone, where it is, right? So that was in Millington, which is 2 miles, like it's adjacent to Newark. So that is his headstone. And so this is the earliest, I hope this is showing the whole screen, J.S. Bibbins. This is the 1850s United States federal census. And you see at that point, he's not the head of the house. Elisha Bibbins, his father, and he's just listed as a clergyman from New York. His wife, Alice. He's just listed as Joseph, who's 28 years old, 1850, 1821. And then as PA, Pennsylvania, it's like, okay, they got Tracy and Catherine, and I think he had some older siblings. So he's 28. They're all in their 20s, still living at home at the time. In 1850, he got married very soon after. Okay, and then you see here, this is what I found before I even knew the sons lived really close to where J.S. Bibbins was when it was printed. I probably didn't know it was 1860 till late. Like, my process of learning took years. It just did, because I'm not a professional historian and nobody was helping me. So, like the part of upstate New York where Joseph Smith grew up, Pennsylvania, they're Methodist circuit riders. They would travel, and it was in Susquehanna. Anyway, this guy wrote about Emma's community. He would be shouting and weeping and very emotional. And then a neighbor of the Hell family claimed that when Emma was young, she often got the power anyway. But then they get specific, and so this is by Curtis Weaver, but this is a condensed. This is not his actual paper. This is on the church's website, where it's more condensed. But anyway, the link is also on my website. So it was 1812 that circuit rider Elisha Bibbins visited the area and encouraged the people to go to the woods and pray for a spiritual experience. So, like, I think he was a really good guy. I just do. And so Emma was apparently among those who took this advice. And some of her family thought that her own father, Hunter, finally was converted to, he overheard, I cut it off, I should have put this better, but he overheard her prayer. And so that's, if you see Emma Smith, My Story, or the father's overhearing it, I guess maybe she was up in a barn, but I think they were encouraged. Either it was under his advice, they would pray for their own witness and just really sincere prayers, which was a neat thing about Methodism. So, and Joseph Smith initially leaned towards Methodism, and they would pray in the woods. He was praying in the woods when he had his vision. But I'm sure there was a lot of truth to it. And I've seen a picture of him, and he looks like a good guy, and he also has a big nose like Joseph Smith did, right? And so here is, so basically, if you read this either here or in his 100 plus page paper he wrote on the Smith, on the Hill family in Susquehanna. So Mark Staker's physically, I guess, gone out there, and they've looked at, he's a historian. They're big in history, but really heavily researched Emma Smith's family and, read their sources and can understand and research these things. Whereas me trying to follow it, it was hard. Trying to research even just Elisha Bibbins, but this is one of his sources here. I'm trying to see where it's cutting off. I hate that I made this screen cut off like that, but where it's cut off, it says Wyoming Conference, Shenango Circuit. So they're talking about the Wyoming Conference. That's important. So remember that Wyoming Conference is where these things get linked together. Is this the Elisha Bibbins that taught Emma Smith and helped convert her father? Is the question. And so here they're talking about the Tioga Circuit. So remember the Tioga Circuit? Okay, and then they start talking about, in this book, about Emma Smith and her father. And so that was a big story that ended up in this book about Methodism. And so she was the girl who became the wife of notorious Joe Smith, down in Susquehanna. The circuit had about 30 preaching places, necessitated 400 miles to go around it anyway. But they would travel and go to several places, and they're on the Chenango Circuit. So they're saying by 1813, that Elisha Bibbins were on a different circuit there, but you see his name. So and then this is the history of Susquehanna County as another source. So not every source he had on there was on there, but as another just book about, it's a history book, really, about Methodism. So in 1812, Elisha Bibbins was on, they're talking about Susquehanna County, it was about 1812. Because he gets married 2 years later in 1814, the father of J.S. Bibbins. So they're in the hot bottom, So here are these links there. And so these are his sources. And then now it's getting linked together. You know how we were talking about the Wyoming Conference? This is the brother, Robert K. Bibbins, of Joseph Slocum Bibbins. This is his obituary, but they're talking about he died in Sandwich in 1898. And then they start talking about when he was a young man with his people, he came west and settled in Newark, Illinois. His father, Reverend Elisha Bibbins, a member of the Wyoming Conference, Pennsylvania. And so that was the conference, again, going back here. So now they are specifically referencing the Wyoming Conference. Newark, J.S. Bibbins isn't mentioned here. He is passed already at this point. Go back. So you see this, sorry, it's cut off, but this is page 36 of Wyoming Conference. Chenoto, I have this link to it. You can just put like Google Books, I think is where I found it. All these really old books. It's amazing what is just scanned for free online with Google Books. And they're talking about the Wyoming Conference, the Tioga Circuit, and then da, 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 da. So they're mentioning the Tioga Circuit, where Emma Smith was. Okay, let's make these links here. Now we've got, this comes from the Hakol.com. They're talking about the Elisha, it's cutting it off. Above that is, it says Elisha Bibbins, if you go to that link. Anyway, at the time of his death, he was visiting his old friend. There's a history of oral churches where they're written that, so they just take random things in a quarterly meeting. Elisha Bibbins is the preacher. He died in Scranton in 1859. And Scranton's sort of not far from Wilkes-Barre, and it's pretty much straight down from Susquehanna. So anyway, in 1842, he also was a part of the legislature of Illinois, of LaSalle, against having LaSalle County, Petition from the citizens praying for continuance of the county as an organized. I don't know. That's boring. But anyway, now you can see there's Newark. Millington is where he was buried. Sandwich, Plano. I initially made this because Joseph Smith III talks about in October 1860, talks about Sandwich, Millington, and he's visiting all these people that are crying and grateful. That's where just this huge clump of, not huge, but there's a good size clump of people, that a lot of Norwegians that just were far away from the drama in Nauvoo and didn't leave. And they prayed, and they were just really convinced Joseph Smith III should have been the prophet. So anyway, this is Lowlanthrop. I'm trying to remember the website, but it's another old book. Here's Alice. So her maiden name was Lowlanthrop. So I guess her family is number 831. Let's see, she's born in Lisbon, 18, and then they talk about Elisha Bibbins, Methodist preacher, and then they mention J.S. Bibbins in Newark. And then they go into what religion they are. All the other sons are mentioned, talking about Methodism, Edward Joseph Slocum. They say he was born in Newark, but all the other accounts say he was born in Pennsylvania. So they just kind of messed up there, but he was from there. Like, where is he from? Well, Newark. So that got a little messed up there. But yeah, if you go here to the census records, that's where all the kids, that he was born in Pennsylvania. I mean, it said Newark there, but then here it's J.S. Bibbins. It's cutting it off, but it was Illinois, Kendall County, Big Grove. So Big Grove was the, like the township. Am I saying this wrong? I have to look it up again. There's Plano, there's Kendall County, and then there's the townships, which covered totally different area. So like the township of Joseph Smith III was totally different from J.S. Bibbins, but they both happen to be in Kendall County. And so Big Grove is not the city, if you see the full screen of this on my website. And you see his mother, Alice, 69, is living with him because the father passed away in the 1850s. And he even names his very youngest son, Elisha. And I just really got into researching him, and sort of got the spirit of Elijah as I was researching this. It just became very fun. And I found I was a little bit related to him, so I did some family history for him on his side of the family. And that was the end of that. So that's the end of that for today. And it ended up being longer than I thought it would be because I just remember more details. But then here you do see Elizabeth, born in New York, J.S. Bibbins of Pennsylvania, but then his kids were all obviously born in Illinois. Um, his wife, I guess his wife was from New York, born in New York, so, but they all were kind of considered pioneers. So you can just look at all this and see these little connections that I find really fascinating. Okay. Yeah, this is sort of where it stopped. But yeah, just go to theprophetscars.com, click on Provenance at the top of the page. You can read all of this and read all the letters of Emma Smith and how she was going to go see her sons in the 1860s. And she was trying to get a copy, she was trying to get her negative taken by a photographer. Okay, mind you, her daughter Julia had borrowed her own daguerreotype and had it copied. So was that her way of saying, let's get this daguerreotype copied? Get my negative taken? Anyway, just go to my website to see that. But yeah, as early as 1866, she was talking about going there because it was January 1866. Joseph Smith III moved over there. So she had traveled with him to Amboy, which is kind of close to Kendall County, but not quite there. About April 1860 when they set him apart. But anyway, yeah, all these, it's just really, I find it all fascinating. And these are little things I found out over time. It's just little bits here and there every few months. And then now it seems like so much stuff, but it was found one paper here, one paper there, and it's just been a really great journey. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this and have a good day.